Joining me now is Victorian Opposition Leader Michael O'Brien to discuss, among other things, the astonishing decision of the Dan Andrews government to hand over taxpayer funds to the AFL for a St Kilda game to be played in St Kilda's home ground. Michael, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Rita.
And I thought it was April 1 when I heard this news. I mean, it really is remarkable. Even the football journalists who are always normally on message with the AFL have been saying, what is going on? Why would the AFL pay money for, let's be honest, it's not a game that's going to draw 100,000 or 50,000. It's Port Adelaide, St Kilda.
Correct.
Why would they hand over our money to the AFL, the richest sporting code in the country, for this game?
Look, AFL, $800 million almost in gross revenue last year, about a $48 million profit, and they don't pay tax. The trouble is you've got Daniel Andrews who treats the taxpayer like an ATM for the AFL. 250 grand. Now that's money that could have gone to something useful. It could have cut taxes. It could have.
Are we sure it's 250? Because there's still no clarification. That's one of the things that bothers me about this. Okay, you want to spend this money, you justify it by saying we want to send tourists to the Chinese restaurants. I don't know why Port Adelaide in particular are going to go to Chinese restaurants, because Victoria has teams coming in every week during the AFL season. But at least we need to know how much. I mean, is it 250? Is it 350? Are we clear on the actual cost?
Well, we're not, because the government is being secretive about it. But what I would say, Rita, is that this government has got form. Before the last election, Daniel Andrews handed over $225 million of taxpayer money to the AFL so that the AFL could renovate what was Etihad Stadium, is now Marvel Stadium. Now, I've got a house. I'd love Daniel Andrews to write a taxpayer cheque to me to renovate my house. He doesn't do that, doesn't do it for you either. Why give the AFL $225 million of taxpayers' money so they can renovate their own property? This is a Premier who's so interested in sucking up to the AFL, so interested in buying votes and popularity, he's actually forgotten whose interest he's supposed to serve, which is taxpayers.
Well, it's remarkable because Marvel Stadium is owned by the AFL. If it was a publicly owned stadium, you could understand, or even if the AFL's getting the benefit, you can understand why public money is going towards renovating it. But given the AFL owns it, it seems to be, again, a bizarre amount of expenditure. Could there be hopes, perhaps, amongst some senior ALP types of having these close relationships with the AFL and eventually serving on the AFL Commission? Because as we know, the 12-person AFL executive team, they are very well paid, very well remunerated, salaries higher than the Prime Minister. So it is a fairly cushy role for a former politician, I guess, to move on to the AFL executive.
Absolutely, and there are some senior people in the Andrews government who are very closely linked with sport, and I suspect some of them wouldn't mind careers post-politics in sporting organisations. But you don't write taxpayers' cheques as a job interview. That's not part of your resume, the fact that I was able to get millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever they're paid for this St Kilda game. That is not what the public interest is served by. And when we asked the Premier about this in Parliament yesterday, we said, why are you taking Victorian taxpayers' money and using it to buy St Kilda's home game to be played at home? It's not as though this was a game that was going to be played in Port Adelaide or anywhere else. Once it was cancelled in China, it was always coming back to Melbourne.
Well, they put forward the argument that the Queensland was interested in the game. There was a chance it could have been played in North Queensland, in Cairns. Then fine, let them play it in Cairns. How is that a possible loss for Victoria? It was never going to be played here, and if Cairns wants it, good luck to them. Now, this whole argument that this game is going to boost trade to Chinese restaurants, I mean, it's just absurd. But if they've bothered to speak to some Chinese restaurateurs, they'd know that the patrons that are staying away are typically Asian background themselves.
Absolutely.
They're not football tourists that are staying away. It is their own community, and it's certainly a problem. Now, Dan Andrews has been encouraging the federal government to spend more, saying that we need that stimulus to stop a recession from occurring. Do you support him on that? Do the feds need to do a little bit more?
Look, I'd like to see the federal government invest in Victoria, absolutely. But what I don't want to see is Daniel Andrews cover up his own financial mismanagement and expect Scott Morrison or Josh Frydenberg to bail him out. We saw the Victorian economy go backwards in the last quarter. we're one more negative quarter away from a Victorian recession.
So that's the first time in about 6 years we had a negative quarter.
Absolutely.
Are we going to go into recession? What is it looking like for the next quarter? What are the forecasts?
Well, Rita, if you look at those numbers, the negative numbers we got in the last quarter, that was before the bushfires and that was before coronavirus. That takes you up to the end of December. So my concern is that with the bushfires, with coronavirus, we saw a fall off in tourist activity, which is a big money earner for Victoria over the summer. And the coronavirus fears we've already seen. I mean, well, unless you're selling toilet paper, then your business is booming. Yeah. But for everyone else, it seems to have had a negative effect. So I'm very concerned that we will see Victoria slide into a recession, and that's just going to compound the financial problems that this state is already facing. Highest government debt in the country, highest taxes in the country, and an economy which is going backwards based on the most recent numbers.
Well, we've got an above average unemployment rate, above the national average in Victoria, and the coronavirus is really hitting the education sector, and that's Victoria's biggest earner, is having overseas students come here. What would an O'Brien government do to counter that? Because you would have to admit that this isn't really, the coronavirus is not something that Dan Andrews' government can do anything about. Are there measures that can take to mitigate some of this damage?
Well, I think one of the things that the government can do is try and give the community a bit more confidence in what's being done, how people can protect themselves, and give people a sense of confidence. One of the reasons we're seeing panic buying at the moment is that people do not believe that the state government has got a handle on this issue. They don't know that exactly how people should be protecting themselves from the risk of coronavirus. They don't know that, for example, that the government's hospitals will be set up to cope. And frankly, we've seen an 11,000 blowout in the hospital waiting list just in the last 6 months. So when you've got a government that's had a blowout in hospital waiting lists at the same time as there's these concerns about coronavirus, there is starting to see panic or at least deep concern creeping into the public. So Andrew's responsibility is to step up, assure Victorians that he's got it under control. Don't just give us platitudes though. Point to the fact that our hospitals will be properly funded. Point to the fact that public health measures are in place to protect Victorians from the spread of coronavirus. Until he does that, the risk to our economy will be real.
Now, just in the last 24 hours in Victoria, we've had mayhem on the roads. The public transport system has been in disarray. What is happening that we can have such widespread disruption because of a little bit of rain? It wasn't torrential rain, it wasn't flooding, it was just rain that we are accustomed to in this town.
Well,
and what's happening there? Is that not the spending in the upkeep that's happening, or why do we have such troubles yesterday? People were taking 2-3 hours to do journeys that take them less than 30 minutes.
Sure. Look, I mean, at one level, and I've probably said this to a few people, when it rains in Melbourne, some people forget how to drive.
That's true.
So there is an issue there, you know that as well. What I would say, though, is that the government is responsible for the train system. And you tell me a train system anywhere in the world where a little bit of rain means the train lines stop. I mean, what that tells you is that we've got a lack of funding on basic maintenance. This is a government that loves big projects, big budget blowouts, but it keeps messing up the basics. It keeps messing up the basic maintenance that you need to keep trains running when there's rain or when there's heat. It wasn't that long ago we had hot weather and you had trains being cancelled because they couldn't run on hot days because of the risk of the tracks buckling. For goodness sake, how about Andrews fixes the basics first, gives people a punctual train system? Figures came out today. In the last 4 weeks, out of those 20 work days, only once did trains in Melbourne meet their punctuality targets. That's a 95% failure rate.
So are there penalties for the transport providers for so hopelessly missing their targets?
Yeah, there's a few penalties, but it's clearly not enough to change their behaviour. But ultimately, Andrews is the one who relet the contract. They made promises when they relet the contract to Metro that there'd be improved performance, and instead it's got worse than ever.
Now, another big issue in Victoria, and I think throughout much of the country, certainly New South Wales and Queensland, is land tax. It's hurting more and more people. You're seeing small businesses who own their premises having to sell up because they've seen their land tax bill sometimes increase by 1,000% over a 5-year period, just increases that are absurd. And there is crazy bracket creep, even if for those who've got residential property where property prices go up, but the brackets for land tax haven't moved with them. The state government's hooked on those taxes, same New South Wales as Victoria. Would your government do anything to address that bracket creep?
Well, Rita, I think our taxes are currently very unbalanced at the moment, and there's a big reliance on land tax, and it is hurting small business. When I became leader, I had the choice of any portfolio I wanted to pick, and I chose small business because I'm actually passionate about it, and I think small business is the canary in the coal mine. If small business does well, it's a good sign the economy's going well. If small business is struggling, and it is at the moment, that tells you that we've got serious problems. And I've spoken to a lot of small business people, as you've described. You know, they work hard. Often people who've come here as migrants before superannuation, and they just worked hard to put a bit of an investment into property, maybe that their own business is being run out of. And they are seeing that with council rates and land tax, it's now becoming just uneconomical. We need to get some balance back into the system. Look, I will always be somebody who will be lower tax rather than higher tax. Victoria is now the highest tax state in the country. We weren't 5 years ago when I was Treasurer, but sadly we've now become the #1 state in the country for tax. Taxes have gone up by 36% in just 5 years. I'm
sure I remember a promise not to increase taxes or introduce any new taxes before an election. What did I imagine that?
He looked down the barrel of the camera and he said, I make that promise to every single Victorian. Well, as of today, because there was a new tax announced today, 28 new or increased taxes under Andrews.
Well, talk about one of these new taxes, because Victorian households, and something for the rest of the country to look forward to if they follow down this road, is that Victorian households are now going to have 4 bins to sort through. So it's going to be quite a complicated process putting the bins out on the curb. But these 4 bins come at a cost. So is this one of the new taxes that we're going to be copying in Victoria?
Absolutely. And it's $1 billion. $1 billion of extra bin taxes.
So we can spend extra time sorting out the recycling into 3 separate bins.
And do you know what's happening, Rita? At the moment, you can sort out your recycling and your garden waste and your household waste, and it's all going to the landfill anyway, because recycling has been shot to pieces under this government. So what's the point of creating a 4th bin where you ask people to do more work, when at the moment all those bins are going to the same place anyway in a lot of council areas? Our view is you're wrong to ask people to do that extra work. You're wrong to have the extra $1 billion in bin taxes. We've got an alternative solution. We want to take household waste and turn it into low emission energy, waste to energy. It's technology that's used in Europe, it's in Singapore, it's in America. It's not new technology, but it would be new for Victoria. We want to bring it here.
What sort of expenditure would have to go into setting that up? Is that what's preventing the state government from doing what you propose?
Well, no, it's a lack of will. The Greens don't like it, Rita. The Greens don't like it because they say, oh, you're burning the waste. It's low emission, but it's not no emission, and therefore they hate it. You know what the Greens are like? They're extremists on these matters.
So they'd rather send it to China and Indonesia or wherever else will take it.
Well, their view is there shouldn't be any such thing as waste, which is, it's lovely fantasy world to live in. I tend to live in the real world, and so do you. So we say, look, if there's going to be waste, instead of burying it in landfill, it does create pollution. Use it as feedstock for low emission waste to energy. You get an environmental benefit, you get an energy benefit. It's a new source of baseload energy. Doesn't matter if it's windy or sunny. Waste to energy will work 24/7, and we want to see that in Victoria. There's private sector partners ready to go. All that's holding them up is a lack of will from a Labor government. Well, under a Liberal government, they'll get that support. We'll get it done.
Now, are we going to have a Liberal government at any point in Victoria's future? Because the last election was a landslide. It was a massacre. Yeah. Do you feel secure in the leadership? I haven't seen any polling. Do you feel any rumbles or any discontent amongst the masses?
No, look, Rita, the last election was a poor one for the Liberal Party. It was a poor one for Victoria, I'd say. I mean, we've seen a government that's become increasingly arrogant because it got a swing to it. I was elected unanimously by my colleagues, and they turned to me because they know I've got the runs on the board. I'm a former Treasurer, I'm a former Energy Minister. I understand these issues that are confronting Victoria. We don't want to be the highest tax state. We don't want to have the highest power prices in the country. We don't want to have blackouts every summer. They know that I've got a plan that will actually help us deal with these issues. And that's what Victorians want. They want me to hold Labor accountable, But they also want me to put forward a better alternative, and that's what we're doing. We want people to vote. They want to vote against Andrews. That's great. I want them to vote for us because we're actually offering an agenda and a plan for this state: lower taxes, lower emissions, lower power prices. Let's give people opportunity instead of actually punishing them and taxing them, which is all Andrews knows.
Well, good luck to you, but you'll need it because those polls, like you said, they weren't good, and it is such an uphill battle to bring you back into contention. Good luck, and thank you, Michael O'Brien, for joining us today.
Thanks, Rita.